Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm State Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith, and I represent House District 49. And I'm welcoming you to our community conversation about the state of reproductive rights in Florida. I really wanted to have this discussion today in the wake of the Dobbs ruling this summer that struck down Roe v. Wade, overturning 50 years of precedent and taking away the constitutional rights of millions of women across the country, essentially overnight. Luckily for us here in Florida, abortion is still legal. But unfortunately, due to new laws like Florida's extreme 15-week abortion ban, which offers no exceptions for rape, incest, or human trafficking, that was signed by Governor Ron DeSantis earlier this year, abortion is really becoming harder and harder to obtain. And this governor and Republican lawmakers have promised to take these bans even further, which is why I really wanted to have this conversation today to discuss really the state of reproductive rights in Florida, what resources and access is available, and what is at stake in the future, and how y'all can really take action to support the cause for reproductive rights. But of course, I'm not going to be having this conversation by myself. I'm going to be joined by some really cool experts that we have, experts in reproductive justice. Our first guest that we have joining us for this discussion today is Stephanie Lorraine. Stephanie Lorraine is the executive director of Florida Access Network, which is a nonprofit that builds pathways for abortion access by advocating for reproductive justice, funding abortion care, and providing logistical support. They work to destigmatize abortion to ensure people who have abortions feel loved, affirmed, and tangibly supported while building a network of connections, community, and justice. Stephanie is a proud queer Boricua living in Central Florida. She's an award-winning reproductive justice advocate, abortion storyteller, and Master's of Social Work graduate from the University of Central Florida. Go Knights. As a Latina who's had multiple abortions and experienced the impact herself of abortion stigma, she's driven to do this work by the love and compassion for people most affected by reproductive injustices. Thank you for being here, Stephanie. I really admire your work and your advocacy, and it's an honor to share this space with you here today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm so glad to be talking to the community today about something that's so important to me, abortion justice. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Also joining us for this conversation is the Florida Alliance of Planned Parenthood Affiliates, which is a nonpartisan advocacy and political organization representing Florida's 2 Planned Parenthood affiliates, of course. That's the Alliance engages in educational and electoral activity, including legislative advocacy, voter education, and grassroots organizing to promote the Planned Parenthood mission. The Alliance engages in educational and electoral activity, including, of course, grassroots organizing to promote their mission, as I mentioned before. But speaking today, we have Annie Filkowski, the policy director of the Florida Alliance of Planned Parenthood Affiliates. And she, of course, advocates for access to reproductive health care, including abortion access, actually in the Florida legislature. As a former Planned Parenthood volunteer and patient, Annie is honored to advocate for the patients at Planned Parenthood's 19 health centers in Florida. Thank you for being here, Annie. And I'm also honored to have you here with us because we've worked together in the trenches in Tallahassee, really fighting against anti-abortion legislation. And I'm grateful for all of your knowledge and all of your experience that you bring to this work, but also that you bring to Tallahassee to help lawmakers like me be better advocates for reproductive rights and reproductive justice. So thank you, Annie. It's good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me and speaking for everyone at the Florida Planned Parenthood team. We're so grateful for all the work you do and your staff does during session to fight back against those anti-abortion restrictions.
Of course, of course. Well, let's just dive right into this conversation because first and foremost, of course, we're all dealing with the aftermath of the Dobbs decision. Folks at Planned Parenthood, especially your healthcare centers. I want to kind of start the conversation by acknowledging that we had so many states across the country that once Roe v. Wade was struck down, there were states where abortion was banned outright because of things like trigger laws. Florida was luckily not one of those states, but how did the Dobbs ruling striking down Roe v. Wade, how did that affect Florida? What does it mean for our state? And what are the restrictions really currently under Florida law in the context of all of this?
Yeah, so when Dobbs was struck down, or when the Dobbs ruling came out, it struck down both Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, two very important landmark decisions that really were the floor for abortion access, but it is what we had federally that basically said you cannot ban abortion before viability. Viability is determined by a physician, typically 24 to 26 weeks, most physicians will tell you. As soon as the Dobbs decision came out, there were 13 states that moved immediately or very short after to completely restrict abortion altogether. Here in Florida, we had just had our 15-week abortion ban pass, and that was HB 5. It had no exceptions for rape, incest, or human trafficking. So there was a big scare in Florida. If you're not watching the Florida channel all day and you saw the news of Dobbs, you wondered what's the status of abortion in Florida right now. So what the status of abortion in Florida is right now is it's banned at 15 weeks. There's a very limited exception for the life of the pregnant person. In April, we had a law that has been under an injunction for over 6 years that Planned Parenthood had been fighting in the courts called the mandatory 24-hour delay. What that law meant was that you had to make 2 trips to the provider before you could get the care you needed. This is not up to date with medical standards. This is not required for other healthcare. And this was an arbitrary delay trick that was concocted by anti-abortion extremists. So that went into effect on April 8th. I love to tell people it was my birthday. After 7 years of it being under an injunction. And
7 years it was under injunction.
That's right. Yes, it was under injunction for 7 years, and the governor came in and wanted a rehearing on it. And so now we have the mandatory delay. Along with that, we fund anti-abortion fake clinics, $4.5 million a year.
The state of Florida funds it.
The state of Florida does, tax dollars from the General Revenue Fund, fund these anti-abortion fake clinics, $4.5 million a year. So you could walk into an anti-abortion fake clinic on your way to get abortion care. Similar to that, we have informed consent requirements and a ban on public funding through Medicaid programs for abortion in Florida. And then also we have a ban on your physician must be in the same room as you when you take abortion medication. The FDA has said this is not needed. This is arbitrary. This is not necessary. So that's really, the long list of restrictions we have right now. Of course, if you're under 18, you have to get your parents' permission. That was another change that Governor DeSantis made when he took office. So you actually have to go before a judge, ask permission if you cannot get your parents' permission. And the judge has a veto power over your abortion decision. And we see it, it's not a rare occurrence for a judge to tell a young person, no, you can't have this abortion because you're not sufficiently mature. And they can appeal it, but we have even been seeing appeals courts denying young people their abortion. So it really is an ultimate veto that these usually white, usually male judges have over a young person's decision to get an abortion.
Thank you for pointing that out, Annie. You've talked about a lot of the existing laws in Florida that operate in tandem with one another, really, to restrict abortion overall by just throwing up a bunch of obstacles in front of people to make it harder and harder for them to get access, safe and legal access to abortion. Stephanie is a great advocate and someone who brings a lot of knowledge and experience in working with those who face these challenges. So I kind of want to turn it to you, Stephanie, to ask you. Annie described a lot about what's currently under Florida law as it relates to not only the 15-week ban that doesn't have exceptions for rape, incest, or human trafficking. She talked about the 24-hour mandatory delay. She talked about the judicial bypass process for minors. Can you kind of give us a bit more information about like what that means out there on the ground, what that means for pregnant persons and women who are trying to seek abortions, how these obstacles, I guess, manifest themselves in the practical world and real world, and how they also disproportionately impact minority communities as well.
Of course, thank you for your question. And this is one of those things where many lawmakers propose laws without real consideration of what the real life impact is going to be, right? And immediately when that 24-hour waiting period, the 24-hour mandatory waiting period went into effect, that immediately created two separate, distinct appointments that needed to occur for someone to access their abortion care, right? So that means that that's two separate trips to the clinic. That's two separate times where folks are needing to get childcare if they have children, since the majority of people who are accessing abortion care are already parents. That's potentially 2 days off from work. There's so many different direct impact ways that this is directly impacting people in the most practical sense. You also have, go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the 24-hour mandatory delay. That's presented some real challenges for folks who are working people,
Yep.
who have to take extra time off of work to go through all of these additional steps when we already know that they have already thought about this decision and they have already considered everything about this decision before making it. The 24 hours is, I mean, it's the additional time is just so arbitrary. How about the 15-week abortion ban, which of course is what's gotten a lot of attention here since it was only passed this year? How has the 15-week abortion ban really added obstacles, particularly for minority communities?
Right. It's imposing a state mandated timeline on when and how you're going to be able to access care, right? Already prior to this ban, 70% of Florida counties did not have an abortion clinic, right? And there were only 13 facilities where folks would be able to be seen after 15 weeks, right? And once this 15-week ban went into effect, a week after the Roe decision also was overturned, you have people who are now forced to leave their communities, travel even further distances, potentially to North Carolina to access care after 15 weeks, and that cost, right? So if somebody you already have this mandatory waiting period, the 24-hour delay, that forces somebody to come back within however long they're able to get an appointment. Then you have somebody having to travel, leaving the state. Now that's not just 2 days. That's potentially even more days. That's more travel costs. That's having to pay for childcare for several days, having to pay a companion, missing work. Even if you're even able to figure out how far along you are, if you can even pay for that appointment in the first place. So you're really seeing folks who because of their finances, because of what's happening economically in this country, people can't afford their abortion care in the first place. And once they're saving up money to get their appointments, if they make it to their appointment and they're further along than 15 weeks, which happens so often because people are deceived by crisis pregnancy centers when they potentially find out that they're pregnant and they're lied to, and they're told they're not as far along as they are. You also have just the fact that people are saving up. An abortion can be a very expensive appointment. You're talking about a national average of $600, and that is only going to increase, and it increases with how far further along the need for an abortion prolongs. So that there's multi-level impact. You're talking about the impact of the economy, and the impact of the abortion restrictions, and then the impact on their overall emotional wellness of folks. What is the impact of forcing people to remain pregnant against their will, which is inhumane.
And thank you for that, Stephanie. And this is on top of the existing costs for someone to have access to contraception. We know that Governor Ron DeSantis actually again this year vetoed $2 million worth of LARC funding for low-income women in particular, who really, really needed this type of support, because we know that LARC is really, really expensive if you don't have insurance. There's so many folks that don't have insurance in the state of Florida because of the fact that our state has refused to expand Medicaid in the state of Florida, which would ensure at least another 700,000 uninsured Floridians. I want to talk more about what the future might bring for abortion access in Florida, because we have what we call the constitutional right to privacy, the privacy clause of the Florida Constitution. When we saw Roe v. Wade overturned, we saw 50 years of precedent overturned. That was a layer of protection. That was the constitutional rights in 50 states. In Florida, we have our own layer of protection. It's almost like our own Roe v. Wade is what I have said, which is the privacy clause of the Florida Constitution, which court after court after court for many, many, many years in Florida has upheld and translated and interpreted the privacy clause of our Constitution to include a right to access abortion and to keep government out of it. But we know that recently, this administration, in partnership with the Office of Attorney General Ashley Moody, has been asking the court, the Florida Supreme Court, to revisit that precedent on what the privacy clause means for abortion rights. Annie, I'm hoping that you can kind of talk to us about what that means for Florida, and what would happen if the courts essentially obliged with what our current Attorney General is asking them to do, which is no longer consider the privacy clause as something that is protecting abortion access.
That's absolutely right. Attorney General Ashley Moody essentially wants to shred those provisions of our Florida Constitution it's one of my favorite facts about Florida. Article 1, Section 23, every natural person has the right to be let alone and free from governmental intrusion. There's no more perfect example of governmental intrusion than Governor Ron DeSantis sticking his head in the exam room and telling you, oh, 15 weeks because I feel like it. You can't get an abortion after that. So there are a few plaintiffs who actually filed a lawsuit after HB 5 went into law, and it was all under the guise of Article 1, Section 23. They are just incompatible. HB 5 and Article 1, Section 23 are just deeply incompatible. But what I will say is that it is all kind of part of a master plan. Governor Ron DeSantis has made, I think it's 3 appointments to the Florida Supreme Court, similar to what we saw in 2016. Radical appointments to the U.S. Supreme Court led to the Dobbs decision. Radical appointments to the Florida Supreme Court will lead in not very long to that privacy clause really being ripped into shreds. And that has been the backbone and in so many important lawsuits as it relates to bodily autonomy and specifically the right to access an abortion in Florida. For 20, 30, 40 years, that has been the backbone. And now Ashley Moody is fighting tooth and nail to have a rereading of that privacy clause to make it specifically not include abortion. So when that happens, there is literally no telling what the legislator and the governor will do next. And as you just explained, some of these people have likened contraception to abortion. So we can very well expect a total ban. We can very well expect something that we've seen in Texas. And there's no greater example than the 15-week abortion ban in Florida being mirrored after the Mississippi abortion ban, which is why we have the overturning of Roe. So it's all very connected and it's all a huge cause for concern.
A big cause for concern. And thank you for that answer, Annie, because the constitutional provision that protects our right to privacy is one of the last things standing between a state that has safe and legal access to abortion in Florida right now with lots of restrictions, and there just being an all-out abortion ban that would be passed by a legislature, signed by Governor Ron DeSantis, and upheld in a court that no longer recognized the privacy clause and the protections that come along with it. So it's hard to overstate how important the privacy clause is to a number of things, not just abortion access. I know that because of what's happened across the United States, but particularly in the southeastern United States, that we have seen lots of states around Florida have essentially banned abortions. In Georgia, they have a 6-week abortion ban, which is an effective all-out ban on abortions. Alabama has closed abortion clinics entirely. Can you tell me what your health centers are experiencing in Florida after Dobbs? What type of stories are you seeing, if you can kind of share with us anecdotally or even really the sheer numbers? Are people coming from outside of Florida to get abortions in even greater numbers because of what's happening around the country?
Yes, absolutely. Florida is definitely one of the last remaining places in the Southeast that has a semblance of access to abortion, because 15-week ban is not real access to abortion, of course, with no real exceptions either. Our health centers in Tallahassee and Jacksonville, it has really been nightmare scenarios that our staff have been sharing with us, reporting from the health centers in Tallahassee and Jacksonville. We heard last week from abortion providers from Planned Parenthood of Southeast and North Florida of a patient from Louisiana whose elderly father had to drive her through the night 500 miles each way simply to access the abortion that she needed. Well, who knows if she needed, she wanted it. You should be able to get an abortion when you need an abortion, and that is your elderly father should not be having to drive you 500 miles each way. We recently took care of a patient who came in with no shoes on. We were talking a little bit before this Zoom started about the exasperation of a climate crisis, an economic crisis, and all of these things and what that means in our exam rooms. And then, most difficult to share is of the patient, middle school age patient, we actually had to turn away last week due to the governor's abortion ban. She was a survivor of incest, and she didn't know she was pregnant. You're a young person, things don't work like that. And we had to turn her away, and she had to go at least 2 to 3 states away. Florida is her state, Florida is her home, and we couldn't take care of her. And as abortion providers, we pride ourselves on providing compassionate care to our patients. And when the governor comes in and when the legislator comes in and thinks they know better, it results in nightmare scenarios.
Thank you for sharing that, Annie, because I think it's so important for folks to understand what the consequences are, not only of these extreme abortion bans in other states, but also how important it is that we defend safe and legal access to abortion in Florida, because of what has happened around us in other states as well. It's not just Floridians who are counting on us, but we've got lots of, millions of women and pregnant persons from around the country who are depending on Florida to protect safe and legal access to abortion. One of the ways that that can happen is through some of the advocacy work that, Stephanie, that you all are doing. I'd like for you to tell us a little bit more, just kind of in your own words, because I kind of gave a general description of the Florida Access Network when we invited you onto the discussion, but I want you to talk more about what you do and how folks can support your work. I know that we've seen a lot of information out there about donating to abortion funds. Can you tell us what that means and what you do and how people can help?
Of course. So abortion funds and practical support organizations help make abortion access a reality, right? Just because abortion is legal doesn't mean it is accessible, and we are facing a lot of restrictions and that economic crisis and a climate crisis, all on top of one another. Our clients come to us in this past 3 months, on average, folks are coming to us with $165 towards their abortion appointments, right? So what we do as an organization and what as abortion funds do is fill that gap. Right? We try our best to fundraise the remaining amount, or go ahead and pay for the remaining amount of abortion appointments. And we also, on the practical support side, right, we provide gas assistance, childcare stipends. We support with paying for people's medications after their abortion care. Sometimes they need some food because they haven't eaten after their appointment. We provide ride share or volunteer rides if we have them available in the area. In some circumstance, we sometimes pay for people's actual travel costs. So if they have to travel out of state, we've paid for people's flights. It all ranges on kind of where we are with capacity, and that's similar to many other abortion funding organizations. Florida Access Network is currently the only statewide abortion fund in Florida, and we do have some amazing partners that we work with regionally. Tampa Bay Abortion Fund in Tampa, Broward Women's Emergency Network in Broward, South Florida. We also work with Women's Emergency Network in Miami. And we also work with some national partners that also make abortion access a reality for Floridians, right? So we have the Bridget Alliance, ARC Southeast in Georgia. So we all collaborate to make this happen, make this work, but it is impossible to ever fulfill the type of need that we are seeing. It doesn't mean that I will always encourage people, donate to your local abortion fund, abortionfunds.org. You go find your local fund and donate to it, because your donation really goes towards making sure people can access abortion care. But we also want to encourage folks to get out there and vote, to advocate in your own home, destigmatize abortion. All of those things are tangible ways to support abortion access right now. But the main need, regardless of what's happening politically in this country, people are going to continue to get pregnant. People are going to continue to want to end those pregnancies, need to end those pregnancies, and we need to make sure that those people are supported. So that's what abortion funds and practical support organizations do. We make sure to fulfill those gaps so people can get their abortions that they need.
And thank you for the work that you do. Thank goodness for these abortion funds and for the Florida Access Network. If someone wants to donate to the Florida Access Network, what's the website that they can go to do that, Stephanie?
Of course, visit flaccessnetwork.org.
flaccessnetwork.org. That's where folks can donate to really the best abortion fund here in the state of Florida, the leading abortion fund here in the state of Florida. And if you're looking for access to abortion services, you can go to www.abortionfinder.org as well to find clinics in your area. as we're kind of wrapping up the discussion, because look, we could sit here and we could talk probably for hours about this issue, about the importance of defending safe and legal access to abortion. Annie, maybe you can speak generally to what people can do, because we know that abortion is on the ballot in November with the folks that we elect to all levels of government, especially the state legislature and to Congress. But in addition to voting, how can people get involved in order to, I suppose, organize and mobilize around this issue?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And there's so many lanes. Your lane might be driving a friend to their appointment and holding their hand through it. Your lane might be rallying outside of the courthouses, rallying in your public square. Your lane might be giving your money, which we need lots of, donate to abortion funds all day long. And your lane might be coming to Tallahassee, which is where I can help you. Florida Alliance of Planned Parenthood Affiliates is always looking for folks to help us in our advocacy work, that whether that's telling your story, speaking at a press conference, writing a letter to your lawmaker, simply finding out how a bill becomes a law, and then telling your friends about the crazy stuff they're doing in the Florida legislature. So there's no shortage of ways to get involved, and there's no one right way to get involved. I think that's very important to make clear. If Florida Planned Parenthood is one way you want to get involved, we'd love to have you. That's the Florida Alliance of Planned Parenthood Affiliates, Florida Planned Parenthood on Facebook. But talk about it. Talk about abortion with your friends. Talk about abortion with your neighbors. Share your story if you're ready for that, and educate your community. So many people, and it's no fault of their own, it's the fault of their government, don't understand what's going on with abortion rights. One day it's legal here, the next day it's not. Share up-to-date information, listen to folks on the ground, take advice from them, and just share. Make sure folks know how to get an abortion. You can go to Abortion is Legal in Florida. You can go to abortionfinder.org to find an actual reputable abortion provider. Tell your friends about fake clinics, warn your friends about fake clinics. I could keep going. I'll stop here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you to both you and Stephanie for being a part of this conversation. We try to have these community conversations in bite-sized chunks, if you will, where we try to keep them brief, so that people can get the facts and get the information that they need in order to get involved and also to stay informed. Really, again, the reason I wanted to have this conversation, just to close this out, is because abortion access is at risk and under threat in the state of Florida. So many people have so many questions about what the Dobbs decision meant for our state. You've heard the answers here today, and we're going to continue advocating for these issues, specifically standing up for safe and legal access to abortion here at Team Carlos. And, just kind of as far as how I approach these things, I believe very strongly that every pregnant person, every human, every woman, they should have control over their own destiny. And as that relates to abortion rights, it means that you should be able to make these personal medical decisions, private medical decisions, in consultation with your doctor, your God, if you have one, and your family. And politicians should stay the hell out of it. We will continue to champion these issues, and I want to remind folks that choice is definitely on the ballot in one way or another, and we'll continue to champion reproductive rights as we always have. Thank you both for joining this conversation, and thanks to you all at home who tuned in to our Facebook Live. We'll be having another Facebook Live community conversation next week, Monday, around the same time, talking about gun violence prevention. So thank you for joining us today. And we'll be posting more information about the Florida Access Network and certainly Planned Parenthood affiliates in Florida here, so that people want to get involved, they have the information that they need. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.